if they're going to have parity and truly global standards, they have to get China on board. The fact that the UK, EU, and the US agree, I mean, they agree on most things that
Right.
are important to like your mind daily life, right? So I think like to go a bit further than that really, really matters.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Deep Learning with PolyAI. I'm your host, Damien, and with me, as usual, is CEO and co-founder of PolyAI, Nikola Mrkšić. Nikola, welcome.
Thanks, Damien. Good to see you.
Great to see you as well. By the way, Deep Learning with PolyAI podcast, the only podcast that has this incredible view behind Nikola. Nikola, what's with the new background?
I moved recently, and this is the reason I chose this place because I think that having a good view. I grew up on the 11th floor of a kind of skyrise in Belgrade, and the view you could see like half of central Serbia. So ever since, I've been trying to replicate that experience. Getting there.
Yeah, chasing that literal high. Well, it's a gorgeous view. So enjoying the backdrop. Mine is still the same, but some lovely work. I'll discover the artist and give you a background on them in the next episode, I'm sure. But thank you for joining. Today, I wanted to talk about some recent news that came in the headlines coming out of the Council of Europe. And the next step, and I think globalizing some sort of approach as to how we can regulate and legislate this massive monster that is AI in general, which is funny when you think about how local municipalities to large global entities and governing structures are tackling this sort of thing. But they just released a treaty. It's actually called the Council of Europe Framework Convention on Artificial Intelligence and Human Rights, Democracy, and the Rule of Law. I'd like to see how they decide to shorten that or at least give it an acronym, because right now it just doesn't work. What this particular document is a 12-page legally binding framework for the participating nations and municipalities that essentially tells the world, okay, fine, AI, but people and local laws first. And as opposed to seemingly similar legislation, like both the EU and UK's AI Act and some of the stuff that are popping up in the States here, state by state, this one is mostly a playbook to help establish those sort of sweeping regulatory actions. And what's notable about this one, and I'd like to get your opinion on this, is that it's technologically neutral. It's not saying you need to do this with particular systems. It's saying, hey, if you're going to regulate, like keep these tenets in mind. So it's already got the founding set of nations includes heavy hitters like Angora, San Marino, even the Holy See. The Pope's getting in on the action, as well as European Union, UK,
And
the
listen,
States.
both have historically been involved in a lot of important legislation.
Really?
Well, I mean, if you just think of like from the Inquisition onwards, like, I'd say
legislation that goes above the state capitol.
They've been pretty active.
Yeah, it's cool. They got to stay in the zeitgeist. But anyway, as a whole, what I thought I would do is I took a look at the 12-page doc. I pulled out some of the more interesting elements to it that I thought I would get your opinion on as a practitioner, as a researcher in AI, and just also someone who's just very, very, very interested in the idea of the global politic. So I wanted to kind of go through and get your feedback on that. So let's start off with the purpose of why this framework was put together. The purpose of the convention in general was to establish this framework, and their guiding, their guidelines, their guiding forces were to pay respect and to kind of keep in mind the concept of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, as it's included in the title of the doc, right? So, but also acknowledging that we need this global approach to AI governance. So, first question to you, Nikola, just in general, in practice, how can entities like this ensure that a global AI framework is going to be effective, first of all, and adaptable to the plethora of different like cultural and legal contexts and precedents that already exist worldwide? Like, is it even feasible to have a framework that every country and municipality can adopt?
I mean, that's a really good question. I think on quite a few levels, right? The legal part is interesting because even the countries that are signatories of this do not have the same legal systems or even like legal frameworks, right?
Right.
Law to Roman law. I think really what it is just, you know, if you're Lord of the Rings and the ends speak and speak and speak, and I think Merry or Pippin ask like, well, have you made a decision? Are you going to war? And they respond with, like, we have only just finished saying hello, right? If you think about the fact that they needed to sign a document that is there to say that things we do should uphold the rule of law and human rights. I mean, I'm really happy that, well, I guess post-Brexit, my taxpayer money doesn't go to these guys, but since the UK is a signatory and the US is as well, I guess we both
Yeah.
were funded their great work. Okay, cool, right? But if we put skepticism aside, I think that the only real way you could go about creating a global governance framework for AI, for those things that will end up mattering for, you know, the human race, for people, for economies, for companies, is something like this, right? It has to be aligned at least within the context of this new Cold War that we're in,
Right.
this side, our side, right? So you look at that and it's like, well, I mean, the obvious thing that's missing is China, right? So like, had they managed to do that, we could talk about a UN style. Right? Is it UN or is it a League of Nations? That's like, and will it fail like the League of Nations? I don't know, right? Like, but they've started, and I guess that's a good thing, right? Um, all of the things they talk about are somewhat like non-controversial.
Right.
There are ways in which thing the real burden is on what product and how. So like when you look at the EU AI Act, it goes a lot further. And it's a lot more opinionated about, modalities, things, etc., that systems maybe have to do. Like, for example, disclose that it's an AI system versus a human one. So I think there's really nothing particularly obviously controversial in what we've seen here. I've not read it like word by word, but it sounds like it's just really maybe these countries assigning stakeholders will be part of the conversation going forward, right?
Right. And that's what it strikes me as well. One, in its briefness, the fact that it's a 12-page guiding document that is supposed to be like universally adopted. Well, when you say people first and you say local laws first, then it's pretty easy to just go and make some suggestions thereby afterwards. But it is still a legally binding document. It does include some things like, mandatory disclosure of AI systems being involved, and a very interesting element about the ability to push back against output that's created by AI systems. So maintaining human autonomy, um, which leads into, is this a thinly veiled, essentially like guiding document that says people should always be at the center? And while there's some more like, concrete terms in some regional legislation, like in California right now, they have this state bill that's in the docket 1047 that basically mandates a kill switch. This doesn't go so far as to say that, but it does say we need to maintain control at all times. So is this sort of just a touchy-feely framework that says people should always still be at the center of these systems, no matter how autonomous they may get?
I don't know. I think it's depends on how it plays out, how it's enforced, right? I mean, like these things can have pretty massive repercussions, right? I think that in the US, you still don't really have like speed cameras that can autonomously issue a fine for speeding.
Right. Right.
In the UK, it's like in the mail daily, not daily, but
Are you too fast, too furious over here, Nikola? What's going on?
I've never had that. No, I have 0 points on my driving
Oh,
license.
well done.
At least as far as the speed cameras are concerned, I have never exceeded the speed limit. But the real implication of that is like, in California, like you will not get something in the mail saying you owe X dollar because you were speeding or because you went through a street which was, I don't know, just don't go through, or whereas in the UK it'll happen all the time. Right? So like if you say, like, when you go through like airports in the US, right? When they take your photo to go to TSA pre, have like a very clear sign saying, if you don't want to be photographed, tell us. And then I'm using I've never done it, but the police officer has to look and make a judgment themselves. This sounds like one of those things. Like it's an inbuilt maybe blocker to a wide scale of these things. And, I think that just makes for consumer inadequate products later on. Again, it depends on the situation, right? And I think in the limit of it, it could prevent something very nefarious, right? I think the other tenet here is like the anti-discrimination thing. And that's something that's been talked about in the context of machine learning systems long before the Gen AI
Sure.
explosion, where as you train the system on data, the system is not, making a clearly delineated decision based on a number of parameters, right? Where it says, like, I have decided to set Nikola and Damien aside because, the bags under their eyes are like substantial and they've not shaved in a week, right? It goes, let's just, right?
Right.
And if you can't explain it, then, you can look at different groups and how they're treated. And you can basically then retroactively see if there's a bias in that system against a particular group, right? Um, that's obviously a bad thing. And there's always going to be this tension between models that make decisions on latent parameters that we don't fully understand, but they do a better job, right? Like as humans, we call that intuition.
Right.
Like if I trust your gut feeling around which podcast episode is going to be more popular, right? Or, you trust my gut instinct around like what kind of model is going to work for a certain application. It doesn't matter, right? My gut instinct around which pub is better, what kind of fight that I see in the street.
Right.
It's, you're basing that on experiential evidence of me being good at that, or like maybe on the fact that I've been to a lot of pubs, right? I can't tell you why A is better than B, maybe, but I have a strong intuition.
Yeah,
Often
it's that Malcolm Gladwell concept of intuition. But as you know, we've discussed in
adoptable, right?
previous episodes, like if as we're fighting towards or moving towards AGI, like will intuition be replicated?
It has been around. Has always.
Okay.
No. I mean, like, I think at its base level, any statistical system that takes a large number of parameters and doesn't create a rule-based system that says, if this parameter is this and this one is this and this one
Right.
is, I will do this. Sometimes you can disentangle it, but sometimes those criteria become quite nonsensical because they're statistical and they capture some other latent factor that you cannot name, right?
Okay.
Now, that latent factor happens to be race, and the system is biased against a race. Like that's a system that is by itself discriminatory, right?
Sure.
And
Okay.
then maybe it's actually really good at, uh, you know, figuring out like which potential suspects or something you want to interview. But then it also ends up false tagging a certain group of people of a certain race while they don't wear a certain kind of clothing item. Then you're going to be like, oh, well, that, right? Like, what do I do with this, right?
So debiasing to this framework or what this framework is suggesting, and to a point of anti-discriminatory like completeness, is that seems like a monumental task when and it seems like it's anti-progressive.
Well, it's actually the thing that keeps pops up in our daily work. And it's this. Like we have very different criteria for technology than we do for human. A human, like
Sure.
police officer in an airport, telling anyone, "Hey, you've been selected for random screening." They
Right.
probably say that when you weren't selected for random screening, and that way, like that legal responsibility just disappears, right? Whereas if an AI system does it, you can track exactly who did, what did, when did, right? Like you're probably logging and putting a lot more scrutiny on that system. I'm
Sure.
not saying the system cannot be biased. So can humans, right?
Right. Yeah.
And
Very true.
that situation, when we put those humans back in the center, what we're really saying is we're going to trust intuition. Maybe we're going to trust our biases. A lot of our biases are based on experience and they're actually true, right? And if you go that way, then you're just saying in those situations, I'm going to label it as a human instance of something rather than uh, machine instance, right? And then you don't have a system that discriminates, but maybe your police officers still do, right? And that's like a controversial topic that not many people even want to talk. But I think
No, but it is actually addressed in this text. And again, a brief 12 pages dedicated to it, but a very notable excerpt from it states that these guidelines don't necessarily apply to things like local law enforcement. As a matter of fact, it promotes local laws first and taking prioritization, but then also sort of exonerates defense systems, military, anything that's there to protect the citizenry is sort of exempt from these guidelines. I think that was an interesting little piece that came out of those 12 pages.
yeah, well, I mean, like it's quite Orwellian, isn't it? Right? Because like, what is then national security and what is? I
Right.
mean, I think there's like certain exceptions for certain operations, vested interests, and it all gets diluted in the whole legislative process. Okay, whatever, business as usual, right?
Right.
Like, so if you consider all that, it's just overall posturing and to know what they're doing, right? Big government, um, they're become more libertarian, right?
Well, it's the get out of jail free card for the fact that they know that that's going to likely be the first, highlight example of the public sector who adopted these, these guidelines or this framework all of a sudden instantly violates it. And it's usually coming from for national security measures or something to that effect.
Yeah, I mean, that's the computer vision example I had is kind of like, uh, you know, can be taken to an extreme, which is behind the battlefield.
Right.
And obviously, I think all governments are quite keen to have autonomous killer drones. And you can see from like recent conflicts that they're being used with devastating effects. So if that's examined, then you kind of begin to wonder um, like what is the impact of all this? A lot of innovation tends to happen in the defense industry because they often get that get out of jail free card, right?
Of course.
Wait from DARPA for speech recognition, so the CIA could, like listen to Russians at scale, all the way to the other way around, like all the way to today, like yeah, I don't know. It's probably means that we're end up spending a lot of our money on talent, Zero and others, right? And
But at least at least we're doing it for the sake of human rights and prioritizing local laws. Uh I am curious about this other little excerpt from the document itself. So according to the convention and this treaty, which covers both public and private sectors involved in the development, deployment, and use of AI systems, it clarifies that the convention applies to AI systems that have a quote significant impact on individuals without real explanation behind what a significant impact is. Why is this phrase in there? Why is it so nebulous? What is your interpretation of significant impact on individuals?
I mean, I think it's probably left deliberately vague, right? Like in that, I mean, if we think about our context, right? Like some of our calls have a significant impact in that it may have to do with your, gas, electricity, internet being restored or not.
Sure.
Is that significant? I mean, it is if you're sitting working from home and you really need internet.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's, look, I mean, legislation should not go too far, right? Like the world changes, technology evolves. I think it's fine to leave it like up for measure. And then, you'll have a case of something and, in the end, people will like a verdict one way or the other will define it for a specific industry or a specific use case. Right? So I think, and again, like for common law countries,
Right.
test, right? I think you could almost trace Brexit to the fact that, like incompatible legal systems and the one major common law countries out of the Roman law bloc, right? Now, of course, when you look at the EU AI Act, what's really interesting is that it goes a lot further, right? And it tries to prescribe in certain situations, in certain applications, what is okay and what is not, right? And that's very
Sure.
much Roman law, where you kind of have to legislate for it and you have to define what is like right or wrong, right? Whereas I think the beauty of common law is that you can kind of just say like, this is bad. And
Yeah.
it's left up to you. And, the high level thing is like, do the right thing. And then you leave it for a judge in every follow-up case, make a verdict on like how much in the wrong were you? Did you make a significant impact or not? Or is someone just after you? Because, they're looking to get like a juicy settlement. That's the downside, of
True.
course. Anglo-American legal systems where anyone can sue you for anything, and you need someone to opine more heavily, or maybe even a jury before like the court just dismissed. Whereas like in Roman law, you're able to like kind of like make that judgment call a lot more quickly.
Right. Because you have some construct in place that says this is against the law, as opposed to what we're talking about here with this. Right. Where we're not giving legal advice on deep learning with PolyAI.
Of course, I mean, I've never actually commented on legal matters to this extent, right? But it's like, really, when you think about Roman law and like European systems, it tends to be a lot more prescriptive around like, this is good. And in this situation, in this situation, you must do this. And then it's a bit onerous. It can be a bit too legislative, right?
Sure.
But then equally, you know that you've done something right because it's stipulated as such. Whereas like in common law, you'll have like a verdict that changes the course of future legal history and what is right or wrong within a legal framework, right?
Yeah, it makes sense. And I don't know, maybe to sort of dumb it down, it permits for the establishment of precedent in real time for something like this based on use case. But I think it's interesting when you were talking about sort of businesses or organizations that have significant impact. That's not what this framework is really, to me, that's not what I interpret from this. It is, does the AI application, does the system itself have significant impact? And I wonder if this is maybe counterproductive towards involving and making sure that smaller technology companies, well, I say technology companies, it is technology neutral, but smaller AI developers are having less of a voice because they don't fit that qualifier for significant impact, which I think is bad practice as a whole, especially in established nations. What do you think? Do you agree with that take? Or do you think that this is, I mean, is it putting too much power in sort of the bigger developer of AI systems' hands when it comes to lobbying and impacting local legislation?
I mean, like, I don't know, like, if you think about significant impact and like applications as such, this in theory should make it a bit more difficult for larger products with greater footprints to, add AI without any concern that it might be impactful, right? In that case, Microsoft adding features to their products probably becomes a bit more difficult for them to experiment than for a new company where they might be able to claim that it does not yet have significant impact. Again, we don't know who the arbiter of that is. Now, on the other hand, with any legislation, regulation, compliance, it benefits larger players, right?
Yeah.
Like, if one company has invested a lot in streamlining and showing that they are compatible with country's legislation, rules, mandates for a specific use case, and the other company maybe actually follows all that and is like completely doing the right thing, but is not able to easily prove it. One has a marked competitive advantage over the other, right? And that is just work with us and you won't be in violation of this thing, right? So, I mean, that's long been um, a tool that hyperscalers and large tech companies use against smaller ones, right?
Right.
And I think, every Series A, B, founder knows the work involved in kind of like getting through like all the compliance certificates. And, big shout out to Toby and our team and the whole has gone through years of things and, changes to our systems, processes, and trying to create changes that won't hamstring us and cause us to be really slow to comply with all that. And, we've been at it for years. So when a new entrant is trying to do something purposeful and have an impact on certain things, it can be really difficult until they build out that sophistication and make the investment in demonstrating that they're complying with all these things.
Sure. Yeah. Shout out to Toby, heads up our IT, has all the accreditations for security and compliance. Thank you so much, Toby. Um, One of the last things I wanted to touch on is kind of going back to what you just mentioned with regards to size of organizations and how this would affect them, maybe giving a little bit of a competitive edge for the smaller, more agile companies that are less significantly impactful from that terminology. But let's talk about interoperability on a global geopolitical perspective. This thing is supposed to be an overarching framework. Um, but we've talked about both in this podcast and I think ad nauseum as we've grown as a company and reached different areas of the globe, how difficult it is to do localized business because of prohibitive existing commerce legislation. I'm looking at you, France. Really, really tough. But do you think are some of the key challenges and opportunities for this level of international cooperation in the field of developing AI initiatives? And does a framework like this make that effort easier?
I mean, we have to see it in practice. So I think that for now, any extra legislation, any of these things does not make life easier, right?
Okay.
And so we make a lot of people's lives harder, and then we do this enough times that we comply, and then we have a competitive
Right.
but like, I don't see either of the two as a particularly good thing. I think for like true concerns that many of the thinkers in this space have, comes down to like global parity and use of these systems in like the new Cold War. So until they can find something like, and I don't think it's reached that stage yet, but it very very well might. You need something like a nuclear arms treaty around rockets, range, where they're placed. Similarly, I think, when China catches up in terms of chips and the ability to just autonomously do what the West does, if they're going to have parity and truly global standards, they have to get China on board. The fact that the UK, EU, and the US agree, I mean, they agree on most things that
Right.
are in importance to like your mind daily life, right? So I think like to go a bit further than that really matters as far as global governance and the development of AI as it pertains to human life, really.
Right.
Because if the Chinese build products that incorporate AI to, violate one human right, privacy, for instance, right? But they get vastly superior, systems for doing God knows what will emerge here, right? Like, I'm not sure that there aren't many people in the West that would not subscribe to that product. I mean, I had this discussion with someone about like opting into Google Maps. And it's very easy to be like privacy zealots and say, don't track me, don't do anything, right?
Right.
But I don't know about you, but I love knowing which road is busy and which road is not when I'm driving. And that
Absolutely.
actually depends on me being willing to disclose my private data, which I do happen, right?
Right.
And especially I think, what I found coming from maybe a lower trust society, the Iron Curtain, coming into the West, where I think is amazing for a high trust society that has where things are assumed to be good and people collaborate and share things. It's funny that like the more autocratic regimes are coming from behind and like using the fact that they're willing to legislate differently and behave differently with these large companies, resulting in them building superior products. I mean, that's the thing, right? I don't
Fair.
think, I don't know. I mean, I know you watch a lot of YouTube, like most men of our demographic, right? But I don't think YouTube Shorts have caught up with TikTok just yet. And I hope they do. But it will be interesting to see. And then, as we think of AGI developing, there will be certain kinds of data sets and things available in China that may not be available in the West. And then, we may very well be changed.
What's gonna get
security means in this piece of legislation.
right? So what's gonna get an autocratic nation, an isolated nation, at least when it comes to like governmentally playing nice, countries like China on board with something like this? Is it focusing it more on the private sector where it's a little bit looser and more difficult to enforce, or is it making it completely out of the private sector and keeping it in the public, which again,
I think it has to be, well, like when it comes to overall like AI governance, I think it has to be over the private sector because that's where most things happen, right?
right.
I think that, I mean, this has happened before, right? Like if you speak to people who, have an informed opinion about like intellectual property, they will tell you that the willingness of Chinese companies or the public sector and private companies to really like uphold global IP legislation has increased massively as they started producing a lot of their own IP and were at risk of others then taking their intellectual property and capitalizing on it. So I think with AI, like we're not in a world where one side is so far ahead of the other. It is at the moment ahead, but not by like, I think, an unreachable difference. I think that means basically that in the future, you need some kind of regulation if you care about even having a regulation. The alternative, of course, is like hands in the air and like who cares, right?
Right.
That's not a viable approach.
So have something, but nothing too heavy, nothing too overreaching. But if you don't have something, then we recognize that you are intentionally pursuing sort of like developmental chaos.
I don't know. Right? I think it's really hard to even have an opinion on this yet. Between like
That's what makes it a fun topic to discuss, right? Because
between like Meta releasing models left and right,
yeah,
just like undermining this whole like. I think there are a lot of people with like a heavy interest in saying like our models are so far ahead and like we're use our services, pay us a lot of money for using these models because nothing will catch up, right? So I think what Zuck and Yalikun are doing by pushing these models out is, creative destruction. It's basically saying like, look, we're not number one, we're not number two. To hell with everything, right? I think that
go on a bender.
it's a fun brother. It's a really wild night out, but like big fan. And I think what they're doing, how emotional this is going to be when people put it in a geopolitical frame, and
Sure.
immediately you'll find a more likely than not a grandstanding American or Brit saying that releasing this model is to give up our way of life, democracy, rights, etc. And then it's like, some guy on Facebook releasing a model, and like, here you go.
Yeah.
And the truth is, like, it's just a global parity. And it's kind of like if all the countries had nukes wouldn't matter. Maybe.
Right.
Because so many of them
Theoretically,
right? So I don't know. It gets interesting, right? It's a different version of the future of the world. I think that like this thing feels quite slow and European to me.
Okay.
And, it's kind of like France mandating that bread can only be what? Wheat, salt, and water. Right?
Water. Yeah.
Okay, cool. But what if Damien finds this killer ingredient and he adds it and bread becomes 20 times better, right? Like, what you do?
I'm just putting GABA in everything these days.
Well,
so-
you already said bad things about France.
Might as well dump on them. Let's dedicate a whole episode.
Before it gets to the point where one of us gets banned in a country.
That's how you make headlines, baby.
And,
Cool. I think we're running up on time.
I'm Francophile, so I really want you to be banned in France rather than me. So.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. I'll throw myself on Le Grenade for that one then. Cool. All right. Well, this was an enlightening chat. I love it. I can't wait to see what happens with this particular treaty and ones like it as it makes more ripples through the global footprint. But good talking with you as always, Nikola. Maybe next week we'll get back to general enterprise practice. Maybe we won't. Who knows? But it's always a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a good weekend.
All right. Take care.